MacArthur can't be understood simply as a question of civilian supremacy, because we know at the time that Truman and Acheson and other advisors were giving very serious consideration to attacking mainland China should the Chinese bring in big reinforcements in Korea and maybe threaten to push us off the peninsula. This included taking steps such as issuing an order to hit Chinese cities with atomic bombs and transferring the nuclear cores, which the president had always kept with the Atomic Energy Commission, to military commanders. The reason they were kept, of course, was so the president would have complete control over these things. Sand pits for the bombs on Okinawa or Guam were refurbished. Much of this was done so that the Chinese could see it, I think. But the idea that MacArthur was the only person who thought of extending the war to the mainland is false.
Truman's action was deeply unpopular in America. MacArthur returned home for the first time in 13 years to a delirious reception.
It's hard to remember what a giant figure MacArthur was in his relief. It's hard to remember the almost passionate heroism, or contrary-wise, the degree to which Mr. Truman was treated as inadequate, inappropriate, wrong, a dwarf, burnt in effigy. And yet, it's one of the great fascinations of history that has come to be regarded as one of the outstanding achievements of his entire administration. You'd have to have lived in that time, particularly I, who had participated in this process, to understand the enormous violence of feeling that was involved as this great hero was relieved.
Paradoxically, the sacking was MacArthur's finest hour. He had long considered himself a potential Republican presidential candidate. Now, for a moment, the ambition seemed achievable.
The world has turned over many times since I took the oath on the plain at West Point, and the hopes and dreams have long since vanished. But I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barrack ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.
As the quip went, there wasn't a dry eye on the Republican side, nor a dry seat on the Democrats. Yet MacArthur's political hopes came to nothing. Only his Korean allies truly missed him.
그 사람의 해직은 군인으로서뿐만 아니라
Both as a Korean and a soldier, I deeply regretted the sacking of General MacArthur, for an important opportunity for unification of Korea was lost.
The new field commander in Korea was General James Van Fleet. Ridgeway rose to take MacArthur's place in Japan. Van Fleet was battle-hardened, an enthusiastic fighter, and not someone known to pull his punches.
I knew I had a good command under good leaders and enough power, both artillery and air, and it was flexible. I could move it about to hit the concentrations of the enemy as they provided the targets.
The Chinese were preparing an all-out spring offensive. It began right across the front on the 22nd of April. Over the following days, the UN line in the west was pushed back as much as 50 miles, and Seoul was threatened yet again. Van Fleet decided to stand firm and hold the capital.
Now, when I had made that decision, Ridgeway came over from Tokyo to say, Van, you've got to get across the river. The people in Washington are worried that you'll be destroyed, and they've asked me to come over and talk it over with you. I said, Matt, this is the finest battlefield you can fight on. You can't find a better one. I'm prepared to, and I'm confident I can hold.
It was one of the heaviest battles of the war. The Chinese and North Koreans threw some 500,000 men against well-defended positions. Overwhelmed by sheer numbers, UN troops were forced to make a series of prepared retreats.
The Chinese army at this stage imagined that they had nothing between them and Seoul and a clear run in that direction. But at Kapyong, they met the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment astride the road. They had to clear this battalion out of the road because they needed the road as a supply line to maintain a force further. So they turned round and attacked 3rd Battalion. They attacked it all that night and all the next day, and the battalion didn't give ground. The ground wasn't important, but what was important was the fact that they'd bought 24 hours in which the United Nations Command had time to reposition a force in the path of the Chinese, and Seoul didn't fall.
It was a close-run thing. The communists reached the suburbs of the city, but suffered enormous casualties under the onslaught of UN artillery and airstrikes. North of Seoul, on the Imjin River, the British 29th Brigade, which included the Northumberland Fusiliers, the Royal Ulster Rifles, and the Gloucestershire Regiment, were paying the price of defending the capital. Ordered to hold their ground, the Gloucesters became isolated. After 3 days of non-stop fighting, they still faced wave upon wave of attacking Chinese infantry.
That morning, in the company that I was commanding, we had 2 major attacks against us, repelled partly by ourselves by a brief counterattack, but thanks mainly to the air weapons used by our own people against the enemy advancing and by our gunners. But one dreadful thing happened in that the gun line itself was in danger of being captured, and it then had to withdraw, and they warned us that they could only give us another hour of close artillery support.
On the 3rd day of the battle, the enemy battalion retreated to a hill. Our translators intercepted a message on the radio. We couldn't tell if the accent was American or British, but the message told the enemy to retreat before 12 noon. After that, the artillery would cease and they would have no cover.
A number of soldiers, misguidedly believing that I was going to lead them out, had attached themselves to me. And as we reached the southern end of the valley and began to get close to ascending over the ridge at the far end, the Chinese on the hilltops all round began firing at us. Not into us, but closer and closer, firing in naval parlance, shots across our bows. And it came closer, and it came to the point where we were either going to stop or they were going to start hitting us. So I said to the soldiers with me, smash your weapons, and then put them down. It was a moment of great shame. I was tired after the long days of battle, and not a great deal of sleep, and I felt very ashamed that it had ended in this way, but I felt it was the only thing we could do.
When the prisoners came down from the hill, we gathered them together and asked them to sit on the ground. They seemed to lack a sense of reality. They had not eaten for several days and wanted to go back to their trucks to get food. Of course, we did not allow them to go and told them the trucks now belonged to the Chinese people. So we asked them to sit down, and in a couple of hours they were taken